The NCAA releases their HBCU All-American list, and I think they got it pretty right. Oh yeah, it's Locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked on HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, Sam Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked on HBCU, your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Yes, and do not forget the S on the end if you are on the audio side of things. So the NCAA released their All-American list strictly with HBCU players. They kind of promoted like the best player at every position, and it's not really, because you have multiple players. Like, you have multiple running backs, you have 3 wide receivers. So it's not exactly the best player, but it's the best players. It's in All-American. It basically is all the HBCUs, first team. That's what it is. There's no second team, just first team, all HBCU. That's what I like to call it personally. But let's get into it, because I think they actually got it pretty correct. And I want to talk about the running back and wide receiver position on the offensive side of the ball, because I really felt like that was the most stacked positions when you look at this. So I'll read off the list and then I'll give you a little bit of a reaction. Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback. Bashul Tootin and Jarvian Howard got the running back spots. Xavier Smith, Shaquan, we just gonna call him Shaq. I don't know if it's Shaquan or Shaquan, but Shaq Davis and Jadakiss Bonds all got the wide receiver position. So like I said, there was 3 of them. Kamari Averitt got the tight end position. And then Robert Mitchell, Corey Bullock, Aneem Dankwa, Mark Evans, and Drake Centers were the offensive linemen. And finally, Sevion Wilkerson wraps up with the all-purpose spot. And that's going to be something that we definitely talk about. I felt like the running back position was stacked, and there was no way you were going to get me to get Bashul Tootin and Jarvian Howard off this list. Absolutely no way, right? There was nothing you could have said that was going to take them off of the running back spots. Think of it like fantasy, right? If you're a fantasy player or fantasy owner, I should say, you're going to have 2 running backs and you have your flex. You typically put your best players at the running back positions, and then the flex, it's like, okay, that could be a wide receiver, that could be anything. But my running backs, these are my top 2 guys. That's Howard and that's Tootin. Y'all know how I feel about Tootin. I think he was an absolute beast this year, and I loved covering him because I felt like not enough people were discussing him. Now, you look at Howard, he was explosive, had 299 yards in the game, 199 yards in another game, the leading rusher in the SWAC, the newcomer of the year in the conference. So I knew he was going to be there, and he deserved to be there. There was no way you were going to get me to budge on either of those 2 players. Now, here comes the argument, and it's Sevion Wilkerson versus Alonzo Graham. Who do you take? And I don't know. This is very close, but I do believe there's no wrong answer. But the NCAA made it to where they selected the right answer. Let me explain that a little bit. Wilkerson is like my flex in this situation. He's not one of my top 2 running backs. That's Howard and Tootin. We knew that. He got the all-purpose, and that distinction was very specific. All-purpose, and I think that's why he got it. So Graham had actually 50 yards more. He had a better yards per carry. Those things were better than Wilkerson. And if this was just for the 3rd running back spot, I would have picked Graham. However, when they say all-purpose, it's what else do you do? And he also caught the ball better than any of those guys. So the difference in running yards was 50. The difference in pass yards was 70 in the advantage of Wilkerson. So that means total yardage actually went to Wilkerson. And then also you had the touchdown edge also went to Wilkerson. So I think those things are why he got that all-purpose spot. If you told me that Alonzo Graham got this spot, I ain't knocking you. I'm not knocking you at all, because he had a really good year. But at the same time, I just look at Wilkerson and they say all-purpose, and I look at the fact that he was able to exceed 1,000 yards on the ground, just like Graham. However, he was able to exceed, and it's not a high bar, but he was able to exceed 100 yards through the air receiving, and that's something that Graham was not able to do. So if we're talking all purpose and the embodiment of being versatile, that's where Wilkerson gets the edge. Now you get into the wide receiver, and it's stacked. All right, so you got Bonds out of Hampton, you got Davis out of South Carolina State, and you got Smith out of FAMU. First off, in my opinion, these were easy. These were easy to me. But I'm going with Xavier Smith, who easily had the best year, the only one of these wide receivers to cross 1,000 yards. No other HBCU wide receiver was able to do that. I still think it's criminal. I need to start paying more attention because I refuse to believe he really has no offers to any of these draft bowls. That doesn't make any sense to me. He's been too talented for too long. He has one of the best and most decorated careers from an FCS wide receiver standpoint that we've seen in a good amount of time. The idea that people are knocking down Xavier Smith's door for the Senior Bowl, the NFLPA Bowl, the HBCU Combine, the HBCU Pigskin Showdown, I really haven't seen him attached to any of these. And I'll go back and do a second sweep because maybe something just kind of went under my radar, but I didn't see it. And that is completely unacceptable. This guy's been phenomenal, not just this year, but years past as well. So now I go to Shaq Davis. And Shaq Davis missed, or he didn't miss any time. Excuse me, they had their stats wrong. He had one with 9 and 2. If you go on the South Carolina State website, it'll see his stats are broken up between one you can click and look at. There's 9 games and another one that you can't click and look at, and it's two games. But you put those together, and you look, he had over 800 yards. He was a high yards per catch guy. That's what he does, man. I'm extremely interested because he's a big body, explosive wide receiver. That's going to translate. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are going to look at, his body type. It makes you think that you can work with that, right? I can do something with that because I can mold him as clay. As long as he's coachable, you can do something. I'd be surprised not to see him on, if not a roster, a practice squad next year. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, kind of, but that's really where I see Shaq Davis next year because he has a lot of talent, and I think he just has natural gifts that you can't teach. Then you have Jadakiss Bonds, who's really close. He nearly got the same exact stat line as Shaq Davis does, except he just did it on more catches. So while Davis is a take the top off, he is going to just completely stretch the field guy, Bonds hasn't done that as much when you look at the yards per catch. It's a little bit more now in the 11-yard range. It's just a different style, right? So that's just the difference between those two. But still, both of these positions, wide receiver, running back, extremely stacked, right? You could have looked at Hooks, but there was 2 really good wide receivers out of Jackson State, but I just don't think they compare as far as numbers and impact as some of these other players. That's just my opinion. I know Shane Hooks is really good, but I just felt like my difference between Hooks and the other guys, this is me, my difference between Shane Hooks and then Smith, Davis, Bonds is that if it was 4th down and you knew the ball was going to one guy, I don't know if you knew it was going to Hooks. And he's the only one of those 4 you can say that. You could have thrown to Daniels if you wanted to. But with those other guys, it was no doubt who the man was. If it was 4th down, I have to take this guy away and don't let them beat me. That's the difference for me. It was an undoubted number 1 receiver, and then you could also look at the numbers. His numbers actually aren't as good as theirs. He had a really good season, but he played one more game, and it also still was a little less than Bonds and Davis. So that's why I didn't think he deserved to be there. I thought these were 3 pretty much no-brainers. These were the 3 right choices, and let me know. Like I said, if you think something was wrong, let me know. I want to know what you guys think. Going forward, we're going to be talking about the defensive side of the ball because they have some snubs, and then also, not some snubs, they have some funny voting in my opinion, but then also some of the trends that go along with these All-American selections. Before I get into that, however, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. Right, so BetOnline is the number 1 place for all of your sports wagering. If you are a sports fan and think that you know what you're talking about, go ahead and put that to the test. Go ahead and get down with BetOnline. BetOnline is going to have all of the sports. You want to talk about the World Cup that's still going on. You want to talk about the NHL. You want to talk about football. You want to talk about basketball, college or pro with both of those. They have all of that on BetOnline. They have the news that makes sure that you're up to date on the information and not making dumb bets. Dumb bets don't really make money like smart bets. Go ahead and get with somebody who's going to make sure that you're educated and making smart bets. That is BetOnline, the most versatile, including the fastest and easiest. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. as we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, wherever you get your podcast, including this app right here. You can check all of that out. And it's Peter Bukowski bringing on the local experts to break down the biggest national stories. And we're going to continue rolling with our HBCU All-American list. And this time, we're going to the defensive side of the ball. Because I think the offense was pretty easy. But defense, I had one major issue. And I kind of had this issue with the All-SWAC list as well. I'm going to go ahead and read them off, and you just tell me what you think, of course. But you have Kamari Stevens out of FAMU, Elijah Williams out of Morgan State, Isaiah Land out of FAMU, Sunday out of Anderson out of Grambling. That makes up your defensive line. Then for your linebackers, Ronnie Thomas out of Mississippi Valley State, Aubrey Miller out of Jackson State, BJ Davis out of South Carolina State. So, man, it always blows me away when I'm saying these out loud, how many states there is. Colton Adams out of Alabama State. Then for the defensive backfield, it's going to be 5 guys. Your safeties are Khalil Baker and Kenny Gallup Jr. Baker out of North Carolina Central and Gallup Jr. out of Howard. Then for the cornerbacks, you have Amari Hill Robinson out of Bethune, Isaiah Hamilton out of the TSU. Then you have Karan Prunty out of North Carolina A&T, who's just manning up that overall defensive back position. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump into what kind of irked me a little bit. I don't like people calling Ronnie Thomas a linebacker. Like, that man is an edge. That man is a defensive lineman. Even if you go to their website, yes, I think he's actually listed as a linebacker, but when you get into the game notes, he's right there on the defensive line. He plays technically their rhino position. And that man's not an off-ball linebacker. If Jordan Lewis would have made this position or made this, I don't think they would have put him as a linebacker. Maybe, but I don't think they would have. So I just don't like him. Ronnie Thomas is good. In my opinion, they did it so they didn't have to leave off somebody else. Same thing I think they did with the All-SWAC. I think they didn't want to leave off somebody, whether that was Thomas or whether that was Land or whether that was Sunday out of Anderson. I just don't think they wanted to leave everybody. They wanted to be more inclusive. So they said, you know what? We're going to do 4 defensive linemen. We're going to do 4 linebackers. And we're going to I would have rather you had Isaiah Land be a linebacker. Even though I know he isn't, I would have rathered it, But Ronnie Thomas, to me, is a defensive lineman. He's an edge player to me. So, and who knows, maybe they just want to say off-ball linebackers and all-ball linebackers, but that's just my 2 cents on it. And that's something that just kind of was like, not a really big fan of that. That's me personally. But they did it in All-SWAC too, so I can't really get too upset about it. But that linebacker position, even with them, is stacked, man. You look at Aubrey Miller. That's the best defender on the best defense. That's BJ Davis. If not the best, one of the best pass coverage linebackers in HBCU football. I hate to see him go. He's into the transfer portal. Who knows? Maybe he goes to another HBCU. We'll see, but I really like him. I am a huge fan of BJ Davis. Like, I just enjoy watching him play. I love seeing him fly around the football. But this linebacker position, and you wrap it up with Colton Adams, who was second, I believe, in tackles in the FCS. He had over 120 tackles this year, and he had about 12 tackles for a loss. So he's being impactful as well. It's not just making tackles 15 yards down the field. This linebacker position, you had Taekwon King, you had Jacob Roberts. There are a lot of really good linebackers in HBCU football. I think that this is really one of the more stacked positions, and it was just fun. Like, Isaiah Major. I almost forgot Isaiah Major. I love Isaiah Major, right? I think that he could have made it on one of these lists. And for me, I just look at that. The fact that I could name 3 linebackers who I felt really could have earned a spot here, but didn't. Linebacker is one of the most stacked positions when you're talking about just superstar talent. And speaking, man, I want to talk about TSU because I said the TSU, the Texas Southern, right? Isaiah Hamilton is a guy I heard about during spring ball, and he's defied my expectations. He was really good. That was a good ball hawking secondary this year, and he was the leader of it. Isaiah Hamilton was second in the conference in interceptions, and there was a particular stretch, it was a two drive span against Alabama A&M in which he had an interception return for a touchdown and then forced a fumble on the next drive. And it was a big hit. It was a nice, impactful hit. Unfortunately, the Tigers weren't able to recover that fumble, but that was 2 drives back-to-back in which he had turnover-causing plays, or what could have been turnover-causing plays in the example with the forced fumble. This was an impactful guy, and I was glad that he was able to make it. He's actually our only Tiger, or excuse me, one of 2 Tigers, and the only Tiger on the defensive side of the ball. And some of these teams are just very well represented. Like I look at FAMU, they have 4 players on this list. And it's impressive to me because they have 1 on offense, 2 on defense, 1 on special teams, just extremely balanced, extremely well coached at that. There's so many good things about FAMU. I really do love this football team. I think this football team is really good. And you look at guys like Isaiah Major, who could have been on this list, in my opinion. This is just a well-ran and highly talented team, right? So you had North Carolina Central, who tied them. They also have 4 on this list. They were both tied for number 1. And they didn't even have Davius Richard on this list, their best player, because there could only be 1 quarterback. You know, if there could have been a 1B, Davius Richard would have been there, no doubt. So this is one of those examples where, honestly, just to continue going, I have fantasy, and we have offensive player where it can be anybody. If they would have had an offensive player attached to this, Davius Richard definitely would have been it. If it was offensive player instead of all-purpose, Davius Richard would have been a first-team All-American HBCU player, period. You know, so the fact that they were able to be number 1, even without their star quarterback, it speaks volumes to the amount of talent on this roster. And then you look at Jackson State, who they'll be facing in the Celebration Bowl. They only had 3, but that's 1 less, and they're at number 2, and they could have had Shane Hooks and Dallas Daniel if you're looking at a second team. These are 2 star-studded teams who will be facing off in the Celebration Bowl. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and get done with this last segment of the day so that we can make sure that we are talking about the Celebration Bowl. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, we're going to be talking about Coach Dancy's departure from Mississippi Valley State. And I'm going to tell you the truth, I would have done the same thing. I think he was in the right to leave Mississippi Valley State. From what I hear, it seems as if Coach Dancy might have been on, you know, a make or break type of year. If that's the case, leave. If they're calling you to Colorado, you're in a situation where people defend Dancy. I always ask about Dancy, right? Like, what do y'all love about Dancy? What do you feel about Dancy? And it's always that he gets his team to fight. They like him. They just feel like it's too much stacked against him. Well, those things aren't disappearing next year. And you want to make a break deal or make a break year, last year of your deal. From what I hear, you know, what's to say that he's going to make it? You know, what's to say that he's going to finally overcome those obstacles that's been in front of him? I'd rather go somewhere where I feel like, honestly, in Colorado, he has more job security. You know, that's just me. If I was in his shoes, and you told me I'm in a make or break season with everything stacked against me, or I could go here where I'm going to have a lot of job security and maybe even be able to build my cachet, I'm going to take that job, bro. You know, I hate that, you know, it's off the heels of what's been going on, but I'm just being real. That's the business side of it to me. I just think it's good business to leave before they can kick you out. You don't look like spoiled goods. Everybody knows you were fighting against something, but, you know, people don't really care what you're fighting against until, you know, after you're gone. Like, people care when you're with them. Like, if you're a coach, oh man, he's only struggling because this, that, and the third. But as soon as you're not the coach, you just struggled. Don't be that. And I think Dancy going to Colorado allowed him to not be labeled as spoiled goods. Right now, we got coaches changes, and I also want to get into some coaches who were praised, and that's Coach Berry and then also Coach Simmons. Coach Chennis Berry out of Benedict College has overseen a magnificent turnaround, and he is the AFCA Division II Region II Coach of the Year. And with that, you're looking at back-to-back HBCU coaches. You know, Coach Wilson won out of Bowie State. He's at Morgan State now, but he won out of Bowie State last year. For me, I know it's a solitary, singular year award. However, I can't help but look at the totality of it. Benedict College was 1-9 when Coach Berry came in. That's the team he took over. Not the team he coached, but the team he took over. In his first year, he went 5-5. So he went 500 in that year. Went from only winning 1 game to 500. That's a great tick up. Then you go from being 500 the next year to being undefeated and bringing the first SEAC championship to the school in their history. In that 3-year, not even 2-year span, all the things that he was able to do are magnificent. Culminated, like I said, in an undefeated season. He coached one of the most prolific offenses and also one of the most dominant defenses. This is his award. He deserved it. Everything he did, even if you just want to take this year, ain't nothing taken away from him. And then you look at Willie Simmons at FAMU. Willie Simmons won the AFCA Region 3 FCS Coach of the Year. And what else is there to say about Coach Willie Simmons, man? When you take this team that had to get a new quarterback, Had to lose probably the quarterback of their defense in Marquise Bell. Had to lose the safety next to him in Antoine Collier. You bring in Isaiah Major, and he ticks up right away. You look at that team and just the resilience that they were able to show and be able to overcome everything at the beginning of the year. That's terrible. The issues that were going on at FAMU were terrible, and they happen all the time, but that was on a different level. And they were able to weather that storm. And after the first 2 years or 2 weeks, they won every single game. He earned his coach of the year. Coach Berry earned his coach of the year. And honestly, Coach Dancy earned his opportunity. I guess all them visits that Prime was doing to Mississippi Valley State, they got a good relationship. Nobody knows what his job is going to be yet. But I assume it's probably going to be like defensive back coach or something of that nature. But yeah, that's the coach's changes and the coach's praises. Oh, excuse me. The coach's changes and the coaching praises that we've seen. So that's the coaching praises and the coaching changes that we've seen over the past couple of days. I'm glad Willie Simmons is staying at FAMU because he has a good chance to be the coach of the year next year now too. He's had a couple of really good coaching displays. It should not shock anybody if his name is in the mix for SWAC coach of the year next year, right? But I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski, bringing on the local experts to break down the national stories. And you can listen to that wherever you get your podcast. Now, for tomorrow or next week's episode, we will start getting into the Celebration Bowl and be breaking that down for pretty much the majority of next week. So go ahead, let's have some fun as we build into the biggest game of the HBCU season. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.